All right, welcome to Technical Reading Through Games. Today, we are continuing our discussion on audience in games. And yes, you will have some time to play today, but before you do, I wanted to, first of all, recap where we've been so far in this unit. So we started off the unit with defining what audience means in games, taking a look at how game designers, approach games through the narrative. And so we looked at different kinds of narratives. We looked at traditional narratives. We looked at emergent narratives. And we discussed the difference between the two. You all did some playing. And we took a look at what your game type may be, emergent versus traditional, and some of the implications of that. Then we kind of came back, talked a little more about, how do you determine the audience of the game you're playing. I did some modeling just to show you what I mean, how to collect evidence for those kinds of things. And the one thing we haven't really talked a whole ton about, we talked a little bit about the implications of this, but we haven't talked a lot about what does the evidence point to. So what I did, several of your responses, I pulled them out of context. I took just one sentence out that I thought pointed to some similarities, some of the things that a number of you were picking out about your game, regardless of what the game type was. So I thought today would be a good day to take some of those and look at the evidence that you had picked out from your game, and then what that evidence might imply about your game. So remember, this all leads back to audience, and the reason why audience is so important is because if you're going to write and read technically, your audience is key, right? You're going to write very different for, maybe a research study in chemistry than you're going to write for, a user interface of a video game, or you're going to have to make sure that, if you're putting together, a manual as to how to put furniture together or how to take apart a truck or something like that, that's going to look very, very different, have very different text. It's going to have icons, you're going to have pictures, you're going to have labels, all those kinds of things. Whereas, if you write more of a, like a research study, or if you write something that is more of like a step-by-step how-to, it's going to be written very, very differently, okay? And the technical vocabulary that you use is going to be very, very different. So I just want to make sure that you understand how important audience really is to both technical reading and technical writing. So let's take a look at your responses, all right? So the first section we're going to look at is what do the responses have in common, all right? Actually, this is going to be the focus for all of today, or how the responses, what's the common denominator here, right? And so I did unfairly take them out of context because I wanted you to see that there are some similarities. A lot of you picked out a lot of the same themes when it came to your games, all right? So let's see what all these have in common. All right, remember, I asked you to provide evidence from your game as to how, let me rephrase that. I asked you to provide evidence from your game that would point to a particular audience that your game might be designed for, or a particular type of player that might want to play your game. So here are some random responses. It seems easy for anyone to play. It seems like everything is on screen to show the person how to play. And with the touch screen, there are advantages such as controlling the character using the same screen that the character is moving. I changed absolutely nothing from those phrases. I just took them out of context. So if you were to just take a guess, what do all of these point to, do you think? What type of person, what type of player? So if somebody's told you this game seems easy for anyone to play. If somebody said, it seems like everything on, it looks like they have everything on screen to show you how to play. And somebody said, well, if you have a touch screen, you pretty much see what the character sees. What do all of these point to in terms of who might best be suited to play this kind of game? Yeah, right. It's the first phrase says it all, right? It seems easy for anyone to play. So there's a big difference between people who play games all the time and people who rarely ever play video games, all right? A big difference. A big difference in terms of understanding of gameplay, game mechanics, those kinds of things, right? And we've talked about that a lot in this class. So if you gave a really complicated game, Zelda, played video games before, do you think this is going to describe their gameplay? So let me ask you that one more time. If you hand Zelda Breath of the Wild to someone on a Switch and say, here you go, just try this. They've never played a video game before, or maybe rarely played video games before. Is this going to describe their first reaction? Probably not. All right. Now it does tell you a lot of what you're supposed to do, but and I do think Zelda is easy for anyone to play, at least to start with, right? But if you don't have any background knowledge of Zelda, if you don't have any background of like how game mechanics work or how to suspend disbelief when you're playing a game, there's going to be a few things that strike you at first, right? I mean, the fact that you just show up in this random, like what appears to be a cave when you start Breath of the Wild, like what is even this about, right? So part of it is you have to understand there's a context. So those of you who play games a lot, I mean, game designers could throw you almost anywhere and you'd be like, okay, let me figure out what I need to do here. And what that means to you is very different than somebody who's never played games before. So for them to figure out what they need to do is going to look very, very different. All right. Okay. How about these? Every roll usually includes some sort of chance. You make choices, I think it should be throughout the game. Trade with players. Decide what to use with your money and what risks are worth taking. What kind of a game does this describe, do you think? Okay, game of luck. All right. Online RPG. Okay, could be. Right, where it's like turn-based or, it's, yeah, okay, what else? Anything else? There's risks that you're going to be taking, correct? What if I told you this was about a board game? Does that make a little more sense now? Okay. All right, so yeah, these two actually describe a board game. They actually describe the game of Monopoly. All right. Now, these could apply to video games as well, although, a role in a video game is different than a role in a board game, which once again is really important to understand when it comes to knowing your audience, right? So if if you're going to take a role in a board game, like I said, that's going to be, you're going to take an actual physical dice and you're going to throw it on the table and roll. A role in a video game can be all sorts of things, right? So it's going to be different. Now, would you not say, do you think that every video game has some kind of risk associated with it? Okay. Yeah, right? There's no point in playing the game if there's no risk, right? If there's no chance of you losing, then why would you play in the first place? There's no achievement there. There's nothing. You're not doing anything then, right? This statement starts off with you make choices, right? I feel that when it comes to video games that you make choices. Or the choice is already made for you and you're just hitting the right button. Okay, you make choices. Does they want the narrative to go? Yeah, so there was a Netflix movie, right, that you could do the same thing. However, you had to choose the narrative that they had already preconceived for you, which was kind of the point itself, right? At least, that later because sometimes choice, but the reality is that you really are set down a certain narrative. All right, so let's take a look at these two. There's no cutscene at the beginning to give the backstory of, and I took the name of the game out so you didn't know what it was. So the player has to know the story to understand what is happening. Next, to work through the game, it takes a level of problem solving that isn't developed until you're in high school. What kind of player do these two statements possibly point to? Okay, so it's, so they say probably high schoolers. Do these sound like something that could possibly be for a brand new gamer? Probably not, right? So especially there's no cutscene, so you have to know the story, right? So some games, they don't give you a lot of narrative background. You just have to know the lore that goes along with the game itself in order to be able to play the game, right? Or sometimes it's not even that important, right? I know we have a group playing Fez. They don't give you a lot of narrative background for that game, but it's not necessarily all that important, all right? Because you kind of learn as you go, all right? Okay. I think it's the last one here. It took my group around 3 days to beat one boss. The controls can be tough, and the bow that you have can be hard to aim at your target. Many of the levels have many obstacles in which you either blow up or destroy that challenge the player. What do you think about these? Okay, it's a difficult game. What kind of, if we're looking at Bartle's player types, what kind of player does this possibly point to? Probably a killer, yeah, exactly, right? Now, I mean, you could argue it points to all four of them, and I get that, but this sounds a little more geared towards that, right, that killer mindset. So if we go back to those four player types, how many of you had a game that you think most applied to one particular game type? Okay. Yeah, so okay, so Minecraft can apply to all four. However, it's probably more Explorer, possibly Achiever. This is not an easy question to answer. This is a very messy question because probably every single one of your games has elements that appeal to all four of those player types. But it's also probably geared more specifically to one or two in particular, right? And so when you're looking at your audience, when you're looking at who the game could possibly be designed for, right? You have to think about those player types. It's going to be nearly impossible to create a game that everyone's going to love and that a non-gamer and gamer can pick up and just run with it, and that all four player types are just going to be able to jump right into. You know, that's probably not going to happen. Because the game that you'd have to create would be so, would have to have so many different elements to it that it would just take forever to create such a game. Now, are there games out there that exist like that? Probably. And you may be able to argue that there are a lot of games out there that exist, but that's going to be a tough argument there, okay? So when I'm asking you to look at the audience of your game, essentially what I'm really asking you to do is I'm asking you to look at how the game design and your understanding of the game plays into the gameplay itself. How fast can you pick up on the game mechanics? How fast can you pick up on the system, the world, the universe that's been designed in front of your face is what I'm asking you. All right? And depending on the player type that you are, you're going to have a very different perspective on that game than someone else. All right? Now, you guys all determined what your Bartle player type was. And so, like I said, that's going to play into how you perceive. So many of you have already changed games because they were boring, you didn't like it, it was confusing, whatever, and that's perfectly fine. Or you change games for other units, and that's fine. The reason why you change the game, though, probably has less to do with the game itself and has to do more with your perception of the game itself. Which is why audience is so important when it comes to technical reading and technical writing. Because if you know your audience, you can create a game, or you can create a pamphlet, or you can create a working document for the audience that they'll actually be able to use. That's what's so important about knowing your audience in games, which is why we're spending an entire unit on it. Okay? So, what I want you to do now is, I want you to jump back into your games. All right? I've asked you to already, pick out pieces of evidence that point to a particular audience, but now I want you to think about something a little different. Okay? So the question still remains, who, which demographic, which type of gamer, which type of player might your game best appeal to? That question still exists, okay? However, we're going to branch off in one more direction here, and that direction that I want you to think about is, how does your player type, how does your perception of games possibly affect how you see your game? So this is going to be more of an inward question here, okay? This is definitely a lot more self-reflective, okay? So the question is that you'll be answering probably on Friday is, how does your perception of games, the type of games that you play, your own gaming history, your player type, how does all of that play into how you possibly feel about your game? Now that's not going to be an easy question to answer, and it's going to be something that you're going to have to think about as you play. So you're really going to have to be very mindful as you play your game, probably much more mindful than you might be normally. I'm going to get in there, ask you a question, I'm going to disrupt the flow of your game. I'll try not to throw you off too much, but I just want you to start thinking about how your own game history and background plays into your perception of the game that you're playing, all right? And then what we're going to do next week is we're going to take your answer to that question, your self-reflection, mixed with your reflection on the game itself, what you think the audience of the game is, and we're going to try to put those two together and see how they maybe affect one another. All right? What questions do you have? Awesome. All right, so why don't you get into your games? Today, just be thinking about your own gaming history and how that affects how you think about your game. All right? Okay, so I know we've talked about this before when it comes to Zelda, but I know with Zelda there's such a history of Zelda the games. You know, I think going back to what 85, I think. 86.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, obviously, I mean you can. So I think you've said this before too. Like you can still play this game with having never played Zelda, correct?
Yeah, I would think so.
Okay, so is this one of the is this a game? So this is a game that could appeal to people who've played tons of Zelda, people that have played no Zelda, correct?
Yeah, I would think so.
All right, so that's a pretty unique position to be in. So what is it about Breath of the Wild that allowed them to be able to appeal to people that are a part of the Zelda affinity group? So like, you know, people that know the lore, you know, maybe even part of fan clubs, people that know all there is to know about every Zelda, as well as people that have never played Zelda, know absolutely nothing about Zelda. How are they able to appeal to both audiences, do you think?
I think they're able to appeal to the people who have played a lot of Zelda games by using like a lot of the same characters and places that they use in other Zelda games, and I think they were able to appeal to people who don't really know Zelda because this game also like kind of changes it up a little bit. This game's a little different than other Zelda games because this one's like an open world Zelda game, while the other ones you had to follow like a specific storyline.
Well, that makes sense. Okay, all right. I remember playing the original Zelda, where it was just the original Nintendo, where you could looked like you could throw your sword if you had all your hearts and all that stuff, right? The classic take this, it's dangerous out there, or that kind of.
Or something like it's dangerous to go alone. Take this.
Yes, yes, yeah. Classic Zelda, yeah, yeah. All right, so this is a pretty fun game. I mean, I've spent more hours on this than I probably would care to admit. But does it ever get old?
Not really, but like until you like finished all the shrines, you completed the story, it could get a little boring.
So even after you complete the story, you can keep playing, right?
Yeah.
Okay. That's a kind of unique feature, right? So there's a lot of games where once you complete the story, they may open like a different mode or give you a different skin, but this one you actually can still continue the narrative, right?
Yeah.
Does it change Hyrule significantly after you beat the game?
It doesn't really change at all because once you beat the game, you have to go back to one of your old saves. So nothing's really changed.
Okay, so once you beat the game, though, you can't just continue an open world play. or can you?
Well, yeah, you can continue playing the game like you normally do, like do whatever, but it also does put like a star on your profile to indicate that you have beat the final boss. But you can still do it, keep doing the same stuff.
Okay. Interesting. All right, so it looks like you guys jumped games here from Wizards. We just got a brand new game here. It's called Almost Heroes. So brand new game. Looks like almost like a first-person shooter kind of game, but it's like a cartoony, yeah, like a like a non-violent first-person shooter, basically, right? More like a silly kind of thing. Okay. So what do you think of this compared to Wizards?
It's not as fun as Wizards. Wizards is probably my favorite game on VR, but it's still like it's fun. It's hard to navigate, like walk and stuff, because you don't have necessarily a joystick. You have a pad that you just put your finger on.
It's a different mechanic, right?
Yeah.
So okay, so Wizards is going to apply to appeal to a very different audience than something like this, right?
Yeah.
So no, do you think the Wizards will appeal to the same audience that Almost Heroes will? Or slightly Heroes? Same audience, same people, both, you think?
Probably not. Actually, 'cause like this, it's two completely different games, two completely different concepts, and it's like way different.
You guys are just trying this out just because you want to try it out, right? Yeah. Now what would be interesting too is just to compare the audience that's the same people got. Oh, you lost. You lost. That's tough. I'm sorry. Sorry to see that there. All right, so it looks like we're having some computer problems, some Steam controller problems over here at the Fez station. So now you're running off the keyboard, right?
Yeah, I don't know how to use it. I don't know how to switch the. I found out.
Okay, cool. All right.
Wait.
So what'll be interesting is to look at Steam controller versus the computer, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well,
It's harder to figure it out. I don't know, like. What the heck?
so you can move around the screen a little bit easier. I don't know. It's weird. All right. We'll let you get your bearings on this, and we'll come back. All right. All right, so we're back to our board game group here. Back to this war of mine. Now, this is how many rounds that have you guys played?
This will be our third because we have to restart because we failed.
All right, so this is the third round. What lessons have you learned in these 3 rounds here?
This is a very difficult game.
All right. Do you still like it though?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
It's about luck, I think.
Okay. So you're willing to keep going with it and try it again.
Yes.
All right. Well, I'm gonna let you guys attempt to win this time. All right. You can do it. We have faith in you. All right, so our Zelda group has turned to Super Smash Brothers. They've been going between the 2 games, looking at the particular audience between the 2, comparing and contrasting. So, now both of you have played Super Smash extensively, yes?
I have, yes, a lot.
I've played it just every once in a while.
All right, so last time I played it, was, I don't know, 2010. All right, so this game is, this is now an esports game as well, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, now, do you think any age level could play this?
Yeah, probably.
It's not. Obviously the content of it is not really going to be questionable. So it's not. You're not looking at this game like you'd look at like a Call of Duty World War II or something like that, right? You're looking at this game for a very different reason. It may be like, how fast-paced it is. Like personally, I find it a little difficult to follow. I can watch just fine, but playing it, I just feel like I'm just button mashing.
Once you play it more, it does get easier to follow, but this one is like designed to be a little more fast-paced than the other games.
I don't feel so bad then, I guess. Doesn't make me any better of a player, though. What do you say to people that watch us and just go, I have no idea what's happening at this point? Is that normal?
I mean, maybe, but you'd have to play to really figure it out.
Okay, so this is one of those, like, even if I'm watching and I've never played before, I'm going to be a little, at least a little lost until I actually play it.
Yeah, I mean, you might be able to explain it to an extent, but it'd be best if probably they were to play for themselves.
Okay. 9 minutes till the bell rings, by the way, 9 minutes. All right, so we're heading back to the Fez group. I had a little bit of time to try to work out the computer controls. So the computer controls easier or harder than the Steam controller?
Harder.
All right, so if somebody doesn't know Steam controller is available and they access Fez for the first time, like on Steam, using the keyboard, is that going to be a very different experience than if they would have the Steam controller?
Yes.
So possibly it might appeal to a different audience just because of what they have to use to control.
Yep.
Interesting. Okay. All right.
I found this weird door thingy over here, but I don't know how to get into it.
Okay.
Like
Which one is it?
this. It lights up
Oh.
at dark when it's dark.
Oh.
And also, when you turn, like, see, there's a door right there, but you can't get into it. If you look really.
Oh. What? I don't see the door. Right there. Oh, I do see it. Yeah. I see. So there's a way to possibly stop the flow of water.
I'm not sure.
Okay. To be able to see to get into it. Okay.
Like,
So if you wait for it to, how long does it take for it to become night?
not very long.
It's
I
like
think.
30 right now.
Yeah. It's pretty sure.
All right, so this is also this is a very different aspect of Fez too. You have day and night cycles, different things come out during the day versus during the night. I noticed, even during, there's some levels that are rain and storm, and you can see platforms in the rain, or like when there's a lightning strike, you can see certain platforms, right?
Yeah. You can. See, look, it's like.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, I see it's coming about right now.
I don't know what to do. Like, the person that comes to thingy that helps you. The
Yeah.
little blob thingy in the sky doesn't come up doing this. And
Okay. So let's look at, okay, so we have our little Fez translator down here. If we look down, does it say, no, that does not look like, oh, it's open. Okay, so it's 0. It looks like 0. I don't know, like that block up top of the door looks like it's, that should be an indicator as to something. I don't know. Yeah, this helps. All right. So this is a very different experience with the keyboard than with the Steam controller. Okay. Oh, go back. If you go back one more time, does that door? No, that's not, I don't think that's it. Okay. All right.
I got that thing.
Artifact. Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Cube shards. 7 of those. Okay. And 1 key. All right. Interesting. I don't know. I have to do a little more.
I can't figure out how to get into that. Or get into this door right here. Like,
Oh, well, if you look, okay, go back. See the stone up there? The stone
yeah,
up top?
it's the same thing, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
All right. Well, let's keep exploring, I guess. All right, so here comes the conclusion of class today. So after watching you all play and kind of talking with you a little bit today, I think one thing I'm going to do tomorrow is we're going to start, instead of having you guys play at the start, I think I'm going to have you, we're going to look at some technical reading and just look at like an example of kind of what I was talking about earlier in the course, or the class period, excuse me. Just so you can see what I mean by different kinds of, different types of audiences for technical reading. And then if you jump back in your games, and then the question I'm going to ask you is kind of going to be a combo question between the examples that I show you in your game itself, all right? And so this will all make sense tomorrow as we go through it, but I just want to give you a heads up. So nice job today. Good work. I hope this clarifies at least a little bit more as to how complicated discovering your audience can be, especially when it comes to creating games and creating for such a wide audience, or at least attempting to create for a wide audience. All right? So thanks. Have a wonderful day.